E com vocês, a queridíssima Nicole Rodriguez. Vou fazer uma breve apresentação da Nicole. A Nicole, ela é... Nicole, você quer começar a compartilhar a sua tela? E aí, depois que você compartilhar a sua tela, eu faço a sua apresentação. Eu faço a sua apresentação da bio.
Okay, can you see that okay?
Não ainda.
All right.
Perfeito. Perfeito. Nicole Rodriguez é uma treinadora de alta performance humana com vasta experiência. Já foi gerente e coordenadora do MBSC de Michael Boyle, além de também ser atuante na coordenação da EXOS do Mark Verstegen. Atuou também como treinadora da seleção olímpica holandesa de voleibol, seleção olímpica de hóquei americana na categoria de base. Hoje atua no clube de futebol Borussia Dortmund, sendo responsável pelo departamento de desenvolvimento físico de jovens atletas. A Nicole, quando nos encontramos pessoalmente na Perform Better Summit de Rhode Island, foi o primeiro encontro, ela foi super solícita. Quando soube que eu era do Brasil, falou que já tinha ido para o Brasil e se sentiu em casa quando foi para o Brasil. Depois nos encontramos na Califórnia, num outro evento da Perform Better. Eu já estava trabalhando num clube de futebol. Ela sempre quis entender um pouco mais sobre o meu trabalho, falou que a gente poderia trabalhar um projeto que a gente ainda vai botar isso para frente, para trabalhar em esse conjunto, monitorando essas crianças e fazendo uma comparação, mas o jeito que ela explica os exercícios, a intensidade que ela demonstra e o jeito que ela te olha e faz você realmente se envolver com ela no momento da apresentação é impressionante. É uma pena não podermos estar com ela presencialmente, mas nós iremos ainda organizar isso e tenho um prazer imenso de poder ter ela aqui. Nicole, muito obrigado pelo seu tempo, muito obrigado pela sua participação. E com vocês, no palco do nosso Perform Better Brasil Connect, Nicole Rodriguez.
Thank you for the kind and nice introduction from everyone's end. First off, happy Father's Day to the fathers that we have online today. I'm honored to spend the next hour and a half with you, and I look forward to interacting and discussing. So any questions you have, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll get some help with our translation. And so first off, special thanks to all of the presenters that came together to put Perform Better Connect into action. And of course, all the organizers with Perform Better Brazil. And for everyone joining us live, and for those of you who are going to be joining us future with the pre-recorded viewing, thank you for your time, thank you for your trust. And yeah, anytime you want to reach out to me, I will have my email at the end of this presentation. So we started off this topic of youth athletic development in the most recent Perform Better summer series. And today I want to discuss a similar concept, but I want to actually look a little bit more at the X's and the O's. So last month, we talked about the high level view of how we work with athletes, the process of athletic development. And today I want to look at more of the how. How are we implementing and how are we executing? So as we mentioned, there are 3 stages of development. The first stage is the foundation stage. The second stage is the development stage. And the third stage is the performance stage. So that's going to be the topic that we're going to cover today. And similar to having very organized bricks, okay, our goal as a coaching staff, physical development staff is to essentially support the coaches and the players that we're working with. That's the first goal, is to always support. The second goal is to keep our athletes available. Now, as we go through our presentation and perhaps our Q&A, we're going to be answering a lot of questions that are specific to youth athletes. But one of the most difficult parts about training youth athletes is understanding the actual training age. So that's going to be one of the concepts that we're going to discuss today. Because when we look at sports-specific training, okay, we understand that that's a very important part of our athletes' process or our athletes' development. But if we're just doing our sport-specific training, we're going to essentially, like this brick that you see, we're going to leave gaps into our athletes' overall progress and progression. Okay, so what we're trying to do as a physical development department is we're trying to lay the foundation and essentially be the concrete that lays between the bricks. Because ultimately my job as a coach is to provide exposure to various loads, movement patterns, velocities, things of that nature. My secondary goal is to allow the athletes to explore. And when we're talking about youth athletes, this is going to be a major part of their program, is giving them the opportunity to explore new movements, new sensory awareness type drills, and start exploring using major parts of their bodies, such as their eyes, right, their limbs, and of course their entire spine. And ultimately, when we're looking at being the concrete for the athlete, so they can have a long-term career, it's simple. We want to focus on neuromuscular qualities. That's going to be the big focus with everything that we do. So as we go, as we continue on and look at this entire process, we understand that our goal as physical development coaches or human performance coaches is to keep the end in mind. So when we're working with youth athletes can essentially start around U8, U9 in a very organized structure. So when we're planning this progress or this process, what we want to do is always keep the end in mind. That doesn't mean that we do drills and movements and programs that are for more of an adult population, but we always keep the end in mind so we understand what we're preparing for. And in my experience, working specifically with youth athletes for many years, the hardest part is identifying the starting point. For me, that was the hardest part when I was transitioning from professional athletes to youth athletes, is trying to identify where we start. So with that said, we're going to look at a couple of concepts to help with that. And one key thing that we have to keep in mind is the message that our physical development program is sending to our players and our coaches, but more specifically, our players. And I always like to think of a youth academy, whether that's football, basketball, American sports, doesn't matter. I always like to think of a youth academy or a youth organization similar to a greenhouse. Okay, so with a greenhouse, it serves to protect, it serves to nourish, to feed, to apply structure. So that's essentially what we're doing as well in a youth academy. And the message that we want to send to our athletes is we want them to be strong so they win the ball. We want them to be skillful so they can maneuver and float around the court or the pitch. And we want them to be, we want to have a focus on speed so that they're fast, explosive, and they're quick off the ball. Okay, so those are some of the big points that we're trying to express and share with our athletes every single day. One of my big rules, or principles, I should say, when I was working with professional adult athletes was always understanding the direction of force. Okay, so if we take a skip or a run, for example, we have the front side mechanics, which is when your knee comes up, and we have the backside mechanics, which is when your leg comes down or your knee comes down. And so whether I'm working with professional athletes or youth athletes, what I'm always trying to explain to them is I want them to have the intention, right, to bring that leg down, or I say that intention to push the ground away. So those are some of the big principles that we're sharing with our athletes. We want you to be strong, we want you to be skillful, and we want you to have speed. So when we look at, okay, we're working with a group of youth athletes, how are we going to execute this? How are we going to implement this? And it's simple. When I'm working with a young group of athletes, no matter what sport, no matter if I'm working with boys or girls, it's as simple as these three categories. I want to teach the athlete how to stop. I want to teach the athlete how to turn, and I want to teach the athlete how to start. So the examples that I'm going to share with you today, perhaps in the presentation and the Q&A, are all going to be based around these three simple principles. Because I believe if we can get athletes doing these three things extremely well, they're going to have a very successful and healthy career in our academy. So if we look at the entire process that we described last month, this is the process of youth athletic development. And when we start to look at these various categories, we can simply start to group our athletes by chronological age. Okay, so if we take the foundation stage, we can see that the foundation stage will range from U9 through U11. The development stage will start somewhere around U12 through U15. The performance stage will be U16 through U18 plus, and then you have our optimizing performance stages when the athlete transitions out of the youth academy into higher level organizations or teams. So this is essentially the process. And I want us to just take a look at this. And your process might start a year earlier or a year later, doesn't matter. But what we want to do is start to have a system to recognize different stages of athletic development that our athletes will be in. Now, we know, those of you working specifically with youth athletes, that we have to take into consideration the growth and maturation of our youth athletes that usually occurs around U12 to U15 in that development stage. But we'll talk about that concept a little bit later. So as we look at these three categories, foundation, development, and performance, we can start to highlight how much time we will have in each category. And obviously we can see that the older the athlete is, the more time we're going to be playing, the more time is going to be spent training, playing matches, and doing physical development training. So if we start to think about, okay, Nicole, what's the first step of implementation when it comes to youth athletes? The first step is, okay, identify where they are in the process, foundation, development, performance. Then from there, we have to identify how much time is available in the week. Now, for those of you working with young athletes like I am at the moment, we understand that when we're working in the foundation stage, time is limited, okay? Some days you have 10 minutes, some days you have 15 minutes. Maybe if you're lucky, you have a 30-minute training block when it comes to working with a foundational athlete. And that's going to depend on the organization of your club, but if you have if you have an opinion, if you're able to share an opinion with your team or your coaching staff, I always recommend that you want to plan for more frequent exposures with the athlete as opposed to having one large training block during the week. So for example, I would always pick with a young developing athlete, really under the age of 16 years old, I would always pick more 15, 20-minute sessions that happen either on a daily basis or more frequent basis, as opposed to picking an hour training session that only happens, let's say, once a week. So frequency, when you're looking at athletes that are under the age of 15, 16 years old, frequency is going to be the best medicine in terms of teaching them how to manage their body. So if we look at the foundation stage, this is our current structure. We have one match a week. We have 3 physical development sessions. For the U9, 10, and 11 team, they're going to be 10 to 15 minutes. And then we'll have one 30-minute block for the U11, U12 team, depending on the time of the year. If we look at the development stage, we're going to increase the physical development session by 1, but we're also going to increase the time and the attention that the athlete has to spend with us. And this could be in the form of doing testing and measuring, and this can be in the form of doing our physical development program. When we go to the performance stage, we can see that the demands increase in terms of time. Now we're looking at 30, 45-minute blocks, sometimes 4 times a week. But here we're going to have more of a focus on recovery and load management when we're in that performance stage. So everything is going to be based off of the time you have available. And that's the first step to identifying the what you're going to implement, okay? Now, if we look at what goes into these buckets, so to speak, of foundation, development, and performance, we can see that we're going to have a very large focus on coordination, games, and here's the most important one for me, okay, is teaching a low center of mass position, okay? So for young athletes, we said that there's 3 areas that we want to focus on: how to stop, how to turn, and how to start. Now, when an athlete is young, let's say under the age of 12 years old, one of the key positions is getting them to understand what a low center of mass is. Some people would call this a base position. And the reason why that this is so important to me at this stage of development, the foundation stage, is because athletes that are in a under 12 situation have to work in small spaces. So they have more stopping or deceleration. And it's been shown, which I'll show later in this presentation, that deceleration and landing tasks for a sport like football, soccer, is going to be the highest cause or mechanism of injury. So my focus when I'm working with athletes that are in the foundation stage is to quickly show them what a low center of mass is, and I'll show you how I do that in just a second. When we transition into the development stage, we're still going to have a big focus on coordination because, again, they're going through their growth and maturation period. We're going to have a much larger emphasis on medicine ball training, plyometric preparation training, which I call landing mechanics, introduction to ESD, having a good warm up, and finally managing and monitoring their peak height velocity, okay? And then finally, when we look at the performance stage, our number one goal is to start to create what we call an athletic profile. So this athletic profile can quickly allow us to identify the needs of our young developing athlete. So imagine we have a U15 player that has just transitioned out of their development stage, their growth and maturation stage, and now they're playing at a much higher level, more load, more intensity, and more volume. Our number one goal is to keep our players available, like we mentioned in the first slide. And this is going to start by not only having good training principles and having a good foundation when you're 9, 10, 13, 14, so forth and so on, but it's all about creating a good athletic profile. So when we start to look at, okay, what does this actually look like? If we come to the beginning and I want to start teaching a young athlete how to stop, okay? One of the ways that I can start to do this is inserting different bear crawling positions, okay? So if you're thinking, okay, how does bear crawling teach me how to stop? Well, it doesn't teach you how to stop from a direction of force or a load perspective, but it can start to teach a young athlete the position of triple flexion, okay? And that's going to be key for learning how to stop when they run faster and decelerate harder. So I'm going to show you in a video, hopefully my videos work okay today, but I'm going to show you in a video series right now how we start to teach bear crawling. And before I go to this video, if you can kind of see some of my goals and my principles when it comes to teaching athletes a triple flex position, okay? So if you imagine a bear crawl or a tabletop position, when I show you the video, one of the key things I want you to see is this double L position that their legs are going through when they're in their bear position, okay? Of course, this is going to teach them triple flexion. This is going to give them upper body and trunk strength, and this is going to encourage stability as they're crawling and walking. We can go slow doing position type work. We can look for rhythm doing patterning type work, or we can move fast and explosive doing power type work if we're starting to do really fast, explosive bear rolls, so to speak. So here's some examples. What you're going to see is forward to back bear crawling, lateral, four-way or circle bear crawling. You're going to see a transition from bear to crab, and you won't see a wounded bear, but that's another option when you want to start taking it into a single leg position. So this is a video that we recorded during the pandemic because we had to work remotely. So here's some videos that we recorded in-house at the Academy. These videos, just so you know, will be fast forwarded. Otherwise, we'd be sitting here the whole hour watching them. Okay, so basically we have forward and backwards, lateral, and then starting to coordinate a circular motion with four-way. Okay, when we now transition, because the end goal with starting with the bear crawl series is being able to transition to your feet and start to feel a triple flexed position. So in this example, right, I have a partner, we have a ball, you can use someone's shoulder, right? But we're essentially starting to challenge that triple flex position with the stability ball, or challenge that triple flex position with perturbation. and then adding a little bit of bear pushes. So again, focusing on seeing that good position L with both limbs, okay? And not to mention, this is pretty fun for our athletes, but that's going to be the starting point to teaching our athletes a triple flexed position. And I'll just play that one more time for you guys. After we go on the ground, then we transition to our feet. And then we can add more aggressive type contact, okay? And that contact's important because basically that contact, whether it's with the stability ball, whether it's with a partner pushing with the hands or a partner pushing with the shoulder, that all creates sensory information for our kids. And when we're working with youth athletes, it's not about how high they're jumping or how fast they're running, because that's going to change as they develop within their growth and maturation stages. But those contact drills that you just saw are lighting up the brain because it's providing a lot of sensory rich information. And then finally, right, here's how some ways that we use the ladder at our academy. It's not always doing various ladder drills, right? But we're essentially going bear crawls in this position, and they're basically racing with good technique to try to put a cone in the ladder. Okay, and basically they're using some valve slides that allow them to kind of move forward. And if, as you can see, if they don't make it to the ladder and the cone falls off, they have to start over. Okay, so those are just ways that we implement bear crawling into our program. And again, the goal is to, with bear crawling, to teach the triple flex position, to strengthen their upper body, their trunk, and to teach them that double L position. Okay, so once we start off with the younger athletes and our U12, U13, everyone bear crawls in our academy. It just depends on how they're doing it. But if we're looking at teaching athletes how to stop, the next thing that we're going to look at are various drop landings, okay? And when we think about drop landings, so basically that's what we would term like a pogo to drop into a base position. When we think about inserting that into our program, essentially what we're doing is two things. When the athlete, I think I have a visual right here, when the athlete is starting high, okay, and they have to drop down low, essentially what we're doing is we're teaching them how to lower their center of mass, okay? The second thing that we're doing is we're trying to teach the athlete how to understand a feeling, okay? Understand a feeling that they attack the ground doesn't attack them, okay? So that's essentially what we're trying to do when we introduce various landing mechanics. So these landing mechanics that you see on the screen will be in a base position, so it means they're going to be on 2 feet. It'll be in a split position, like a split squat, so they'll start high and then drop down into a split position. And then finally, as you just saw in that video, we will have variations that are going to be in a 1-leg position. So again, with young athletes, our job is to teach them how to stop. And these are different ways that we can start doing it in a safe and easy manner. If we look further, and I don't have any examples on video using medicine ball or loaded tools like a Viper, but we can basically start body weight, which are the examples that I have for you today. We can add medicine balls into the same movements that we're doing with body weight, and then finally use a loaded tool like a sandbag or a Viper. Okay, so let's just watch some simple examples. And again, these might be movements that you're familiar with, But again, the idea is trying to understand how are we teaching young athletes how to stop. Okay? So if you want to make it harder, you can close the eyes, and it's doing the same thing, 2 to 1. Okay, and then we can start to add a rotation. Switch to the left leg. Bop, bop, bop. Then, right, we can start to teach them leg separation. And I know we're talking about how to stop, but we can start to teach them the leg separation, because eventually we will start to do pogos in this position as well. Okay. So essentially, when we're working kind of in summary for this first small section, what we're trying to do is not only make our training engaging from a sensory information standpoint, but what we're trying to do is target and train the central nervous system, right? And it's as simple as focusing on 2 areas, right? The brain and the spinal cord, okay? How are we activating the brain? And how are we positioning their body, which Dr. Stuart McGill will talk about extensively in a lot of detail in the next presentation. But how are we working on training the central nervous system? And ultimately, it's about coordinating both consciously and unconsciously, okay? And when we start to look at, okay, what's the big picture with training athletes, right? What are the motor abilities that we want to be focused on, okay? And many years ago, there was this concept that there's sensitive periods to train motor abilities in our young athletes. And there was a critical appraisal done recently, and the conclusion was simple. For youth coaches, these findings indicate that they should no longer rely on generic sensitive periods as proposed in the past, but rather train all physical attributes during all stages of development. Okay, so when we're looking at the stages that I'm presenting, foundation, development, and performance, we're essentially trying to follow an entire model that trains all physical attributes, right? All motor abilities, just implemented either unstructured, low structured, moderate structured, high structured, or very high structured, depending on the age. And so for more information on this particular model, the YPD model, originally proposed by Dr. Rodri Lloyd and Dr. John Oliver, essentially, right, what we're trying to focus on is having age-appropriate type movements. So meaning we're still going to do strength, right, for a 10-year-old, for an 11-year-old, but it's all about how we're implementing that strength. And I'll show you examples of that in just a second. And then same thing for female athletes. We understand that female athletes will start to, as you can see right here, mature a lot earlier than male athletes. So take that into consideration when you're having a mix of male athletes and female athletes working in the same team or in the same group. Okay, so we have about 20 more minutes before we jump into the Q&A. So I'll kind of keep progressing forward here. I don't see any questions thus far. Okay, so when we look at key physical development qualities, okay, for me, the main things that I'm trying to expose my athletes to are going to be somewhere within these 10 points. For a young athlete, we might only focus on 5 of these points. For an athlete who's 16 years old, for sure, we're focusing on all 10 of these points. So the physical qualities that we're trying to develop are really important, okay? But really more importantly is deciding how often or the frequency of these exposures of, let's say, reaction, and simply whether we want to do that the day before a match. Okay, so depending on your sport, depending on how many times you're seeing your athletes, this example is proposed by working with an athlete 3 days a week. So essentially what we're trying to identify, not only for our physical development coaches, but what we're trying to identify for the sport coaches that we're working alongside of, or the sport coaches who we are supporting. We want to be able to identify what they're doing in their training, and we want to be able to share what we're doing in our training, so we can basically have ideal frequency of exposure, let's say for deceleration, power, strength. And we want to identify as a team, as a coaching staff, whether we want to do these the day before a match, and it's a simple yes or no, okay? Because this will start to, this doesn't really make a huge difference when you're working with a 12-year-old team, but when you start to work maybe with a 10-year-old team, but when you start to work with your teams that are 13, 14, 15, 16, and they're a little bit older, this starts to become more of a focus point. So here, I'm going to show you some examples. This is basically our U11 team transitioning into U12. So they've worked with me now for many months here at this point. But when we start to look at strength training, okay, we did introduce strength training to our U11 team because we knew that it would be a big part of their program when they turned U12. Okay, so when we look at strength training here in this example, we're doing a couple of different things here. For sure, we're loading the lower body. So this is a substitute for a sled. So for sure, we're loading the lower body. But what's unique to my population is they don't use their upper body a lot, okay, with the exception of doing some push-ups. So here, I'm always trying to find new ways and different ways to challenge their grip strength, okay? So by making them hold an implement such as a stick, maybe play tug of war, maybe do some walking crossover walks here, right? We can start to, sorry, the sound's on there. We can start to load not only their grip, but load their lower body, okay? And this is in addition to some of the basic squatting patterns that we're learning when we go into the training facility located right here. But these are gonna be different ways that we can start to load our athletes, not only with the lower body, but with the upper body. Okay, and I'll just kind of jump forward here. So now they're doing what we call a waterfall start. I'll just start over here, where they're going one by one. And again, all we're trying to do is not only load them in a linear position, but teach them how to produce force on the outside part of their foot, because that's essentially what's going to help them transfer force into the ground later in their career. Okay, so when we're talking about a lot of different things right now. So we've discussed an introduction of how to teach athletes how to stop. Okay, we showed just now a brief example of how we're loading our athletes, not only on the pitch, or mainly on the pitch, because we're not only loading athletes in the gym. But here now I want to discuss and share various start positions, okay? Because now this is going to tackle our second mission of teaching athletes how to start, okay? So when we look at running, and we're talking about young athletes at this point, but when we look at running, we learned training adult and professional athletes is that when we want to make someone or help someone be faster, We simply have to run fast. And that's going to be a limiting factor in sports that have an implement, a ball, things of that nature, right? The ball can sometimes slow them down in some situations. So when we're training the abilities to run as fast as possible, we're going to do that in a couple of different ways. The first way is going to be in a standing position. So imagine the athletes are all lined up on a line, they're standing, and we can go various directions, meaning I'm standing forward and I run forward. I'm standing sideways and I run, I start lateral, or I have my back towards you and I have to drop step to go into a sprint, right? Those are different ways that we can vary or change the start position, okay? And I'll actually put a pin on that note and just kind of share some programming examples for you regarding our starts. On the days that we're focused on, and really it's every day, I want them to run as fast as they can with me. But on the days that we're focused on running or how to start, I'm trying to, by the middle and end of the session, I'm trying to insert about 8 to 10 opportunities for my young athletes to run as fast as possible. Okay, so you can do 8 to 10 different examples like you see on the screen, because these are just different ways to start them. But essentially, my goal is to have 8 to 10 quality sprints, races, or runs when it comes to my young developing athletes. Okay, so in the standing position, we can go in various directions. We can start with a little bit of activation, like a pogo drill. We can start with our feet moving really fast, like a rapid response drill, or we can start with some sort of plyometric. It's completely up to you. When you transition into a single leg position, which is the second box, again, we can do it with different directions. We can start to add in different movements, like drawing the athlete's name or writing the club's name, and so forth and so on. We can get athletes to be on their hands and knees. So basically running in a bear position, starting in a bear position and then transitioning from low to high. Because if we think about that, imagine we're in a bear position on all fours, right? We say go, the athlete's reacting off of a signal, a sound, whatever the case is, right? The athlete is having to learn how to start from a low position, so basically horizontal to the ground, and have to learn how to manipulate the center of mass to go out and do a sprint. Okay, so those are some of the reasons how or why we would start the athletes in hands and knees. They can be in a 2-point start, so meaning their foot is in a split position. They can switch, and then run. And then my personal favorites, because I feel that this gives them better awareness of their position. My favorite positions are the tall kneeling position, which means when the athletes are on 2 knees, or a half kneeling position, which means when the athlete is on 1 knee and the other foot is up in that position L. Okay, and again, I'll show you some examples here, or we can just have them on their belly or on their back and going into a run. Okay, so in summary, this is just showing you different ways that I challenge my athletes to get out of their current position so they can do their job and run as fast as possible. And this is just how I like to organize it. Sometimes we're running 5 to 7 meters. And then once a week, because I only have my athletes 3 times a week, once a week, we're running much longer distances, like 15 to 30 meters. Okay. So here's some examples. This is actually a very young team, and we were just shooting video that day. So what I'm doing here is a simple arm action drill. Okay. But what you didn't see beforehand is that we were teaching them how to get in a position L, right? We were teaching them, right, how to stay low. And then we're basically trying to get them to understand some leg strength and getting them to get a little uncomfortable. Okay, so first, and I'll just kind of go back. First, we start isometric. So they're teaching, or they're learning, excuse me, how to be in this position L. Then after practice, they start with the high center of mass, boom, 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 boom. And then I challenge them to find the exact same position L that they just experienced doing the static arm action drills. Okay, so everything's just kind of a progression here, right? We'll go again. Athletes look very different, but what we're trying to do is go with landing mechanics. And then here, before I let this video play for you, here, basically I'm having them start in a tall kneeling position. They're gonna quickly find their position L and then come out into a run. Okay, so that's basically what you're gonna see right now. And they're actually reacting off of one player. And that one player is going, that one right there, that one player is going to signal their start. Yes, there you go. Then I always add in one challenge of the day. Okay, so in the previous video, you saw a pogo to base position on 2 legs. Right? And then here I always add in one challenge because you get this reaction. You see this player right here, all smiles, right? They love this one. So basically they're starting in a tall kneeling position, going on their feet, and then reacting off of this player right here. Okay, so tall kneeling position, on their feet, and then they basically go into a sprint. We'll see that one more time just for fun. Boom. Okay. So wrapping up here, and then we're going to jump into a Q&A in just a couple of minutes. In my sport that I'm currently working with here in Poland is a youth football academy. Okay, and one of the researchers that I want to leave you with in this presentation, his name is Dr. PJ Reed. Okay, and I've been studying his work now for many months, and looking at doing some research here in the near future on very similar topics. But we know, and this is going to be my finishing comments, or my final comments to you, okay, is that we know that in the sport like football, okay, that we have repeated high intensity running bouts, and I'm talking youth football here as well. We have jumping, cutting movements. We have multi-directional movements, usually with accumulated fatigue, okay? And we also know that for youth athletes, okay, acute injuries account for 60 to 90% of all of their injuries, right? So acute injuries. Now, 40 to 60% of those injuries occur at the ankle, the knee, or the thigh, okay? And it was stated in some of Dr. PJ Reed's work is that the biggest mechanism of injury is going to be our landing in our deceleration tasks. Okay, so we want to start to be able to have different models to start to identify where our focus is going to be in terms of testing and assessment, and where our focus is going to be in terms of movement and exercise selection. Okay, so this article titled Neuromuscular Risk Factors for Knee and Ankle Ligament Injuries in Male Youth Soccer Players is work by Dr. PJ Reed that I highly encourage everyone on this call that are interested in youth football to look at. And this is going to be just basically a simple infographic to help highlight the points that you just saw in the previous slide. Okay, so in summary, before we go into the Q&A, I'm going to encourage everyone on this call that work in any organization, whether that's a private organization or a club setting or a team setting. My recommendation, especially working in a country where I don't speak the language, I can coach in Polish, but I can't conduct meetings in Polish. My best recommendation to you is to understand this concept of leading up, okay? And leading up for a physical development coach or a rehab specialist means being transparent and having clear communication to your entire staff. And so that means having everything documented. For me, I have a 3-phase approach with how I'm working with this academy. So basically the point is they know that we're working in 3 phases. We're going to tackle these tasks in the first year. So we're going to have movement quality screens. We're going to implement a red flag pre-training session, meaning any of the players that scored low in our movement quality screen is going to be in a red flag group, and they're going to get basically a 30-minute physical development class that happens indoor. Leading up for me meant that I had to have coach education 1 time a month. I had to assess and monitor the maturation and performance testing that happened 2 to 4 times a year, depending on the age group. One of my goals in my first year was having a really good, clear warm-up that happened daily, whether I was off teaching or I wasn't available at the academy. These are warm-ups that the coaches will run on their own, and all of our warm-ups happen with the ball and happen without the ball, okay? And then we're just basically laying down these fundamental principles that I've shared with you, which are simple: how to stop, how to start, and how to turn, okay? And everything goes into one workbook or one manual that everyone can reference and everyone can look at on their own when they're talking to parents and things of that nature. And before we go into the Q&A, I will say this: when things are written down, when we have manuals and documents to support our ideas and to be clear, this allows for the confusion to be at a minimum. Meaning, if we're in a team meeting and we're discussing whether we want to do 10-meter runs or 20-meter runs for our testing, right? We basically can refer back to our manual or our workbook and say, nope, this is what we decided at the beginning of the year. Let's try it this way. And based off of that, we can make adjustments. So it's all about communication and being transparent and having things written down. Okay, that's what I'm going to share with you guys today. We have 30 minutes to jump into our Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so I can take questions from you guys. And then if there is a reason to show you any other documents that I have or any other videos, we will do that. So before I stop sharing my screen, I just want to say thank you very much for your time. And I want to also thank Perform Better again for this opportunity. I hope this information was clear, and I hope it was as simple as I prepared it to be. Okay, thank you. Let's go into the Q&A now.
Nicole, normalmente, acho que nosso time de tradução já está fazendo perfeito. Nicole, normalmente ao final de toda a apresentação estamos mostrando a vibração do time no Brasil. Uhul! Muito bom! Excelente! Seria assim que você estaria recebendo esse calor do povo brasileiro, então eu estou tentando transformar isso para vocês nessa nossa conferência.
I end my training sessions with my young athletes when they have a good session, right? They're focused, we're having fun, we're good. I always say 2 claps for you. And I say it in English and they understand, and everyone at the same time goes, so, 2 claps for you, Felix.
Muito bom, muito bom. Nicole, excelente material, excelente informação. Tenho certeza que você contribuiu, sim. Temos aqui várias perguntas. Vou começar com o Watson Soares. Como você monitora e controla essa carga de treino? Qual etapa você considera mais desafiadora ou mais difícil de se implantar nesses pilares de fundação, desenvolvimento e performance? Sua sistematização ou periodização é feita semanalmente, mensalmente, trimestre, semestre, anual? Como é feito isso?
Well, great question, very clear. I would say in my experience here in Poland, the hardest stage to manage is going to be the foundation stage. That would be for me personally, the most challenging because the time is really short. I'm talking sometimes as short as 10 minutes. So I would say that that's going to be the hardest stage to manage simply because of the time and of the attention of the athletes, right? When you're working with 9, 10, 11-year-old athletes, the number one goal is to make it sensory rich. So having obstacle courses, letting them compete. In the way that I program for the foundation stage is like this. They compete, I teach, and then they compete. That's it. So it's a game, a race. I give them one teaching point, and then I let them do that same game or race again. So that one I would say is the most challenging one because if you think about the performance stage, that one's easy, right? You can manage a lot of the variables because they're older athletes. When they're younger athletes, you can't manage those variables. The second thing that is going to be the most important in terms of the assessment, whether that's quarterly, bi-yearly, or yearly, is going to be the development stage. So we said the development stage is from U12 to U15, somewhere in that zone. That one's going to be the hardest one, of course, because there are going to be different stages of growth and maturation. So when we're assessing the athletes that are in the development stage, U12 through U15, those are happening every 3 months. When we're looking at the foundation stage, specifically ages for us, it's 8, 9, and 10. That is going to happen 2 times a year. And then when they're 11, that will also happen every quarter, so to speak. So that's how we're doing it at the Academy. And we're measuring movement quality, which will have elements of the FMS, but not all 7 movements for the younger players. We will be looking at height and weight in different positions, standing and sitting, for the measurement of our height. And then we will look at speed testing in different positions. So 10 meter, 20 meter for our athletes that are 11 and transitioning into the development zone, or the development stage, excuse me. And then for the 8, 9, and 10-year-olds, they're usually staying at the 10-meter mark. We're not having them run any longer than that. So those are going to be the basic assessments. When we get to our development stage, we will start to add in specific jump strategies or jump testing. More specifically, not looking at how high they jump, but looking at their landing strategies and the forces that they have to take on with landing. Because again, the highest mechanism of injury is going to be with deceleration tasks. So we will start looking at their drop jump performances to assess their injury.
Perfeito. Pergunta de Juliano. Há algum tipo de controle emocional no desenvolvimento de jovens atletas? Falo a respeito do impacto do treinamento no desenvolvimento emocional desses jovens atletas.
Well, I think those emotional loads will start when they really start to transition into young adults. And that's clear. I think all of us know that. So if we're looking at athletes in the foundation stage, the emotional loads that we have to deal with is their excitement of being at the academy every single day. So it's our goal to make our training and our experience at the academy feel like Christmas Day. Like every day is like Christmas for the young guys. When we start to look at the development, we at the club right now don't have any resources for any of the emotional stress that the athletes go through. At the moment, we have some consultants that come in, but at the moment there's no full system. But really what we're trying to do is we have, in that last physical development workbook example that I showed you, we have ways of just assessing it. Okay, so at the end of every training practice or training session, each of the coaches will identify on a scale to 1 to 5, what was their mindset like? Okay, so for example, how attentive were they? How engaged were they? You know, were they happy? Were they disappointed in themselves? So there's a simple 1 to 5 scale that the coaches will write down after every training session, because they write down all of their minutes, all the practices are written down, and we put it into a big template. So we will do that at the end of every training session. And when we have our reports that we develop every quarter, we will have a 1 to 5 rating for movement quality, which I give, a 1 to 5 rating on their mindset, okay, and then a 1 to 5 rating on their football abilities. So we're tracking it on a low level with the coaches every single day based off of what we see. And then when we have meetings with the coaches, if they have a 1 on their mindset, then we discuss why with the parents and try to get more information. So that's as far as we have gotten, because we're a brand new academy and we want to keep it simple for now, and we don't have any external resources at the moment. So that's what we do after every training session, which is 3 or 4 times a week, depending on the age group that we have.
Perfeito. Elogios aqui para você da Gláucia Gonçalves. Nicole, muito obrigada, excelente apresentação. Douglas Tages, bom dia, Nicole. Primeiramente, gostaria de agradecer a oportunidade de poder te ouvir. Sou muito apreciador e fã do seu trabalho. No Brasil, principalmente nas escolinhas, esse trabalho de ensinar e usar trabalhos de forças e ensino de técnicas como aterrissar, a caminhada do urso, como você apresentou, existe muita resistência por falta de conhecimento e não entender a importância disso. Dessa forma, só jogar futebol, na visão deles, seria a melhor maneira de construir um bom jogador. Como você aconselharia construir essa relação e apresentar esse trabalho?
Yeah, really common question that a lot of us get. Number one, I will say that I have met many soccer players, many football players that have basically primarily played football and have done really well in their career. That's number one. So I can't say that the physical development portion is the most important part, because when you look at an adult football player, okay, you know, 45% of football is their technical tactical. You know, you have their social and then you have their physical. Okay, physical isn't 90% of football. Okay, so we have to respect that and understand that it's just a support piece. Regarding implementing physical development programs, if I have resistance, I always tell them that I am introducing new ranges of motion to the athletes to help strengthen and to help basically teach them loading mechanics, right? So teaching them how to accept force into the ground. So you will always have resistance. My number one goal, and if your athletes aren't having fun doing the things that you're doing, then you're doing something wrong. So I rarely get any kickback from the coaching staff. And I've worked in many different countries. I've worked in the US, we've worked in Brazil, we've worked in the UK, in Germany, in Poland. We've worked in many different countries, and you rarely get any kickback from the staff when your athletes are having fun. And for me, when we're doing these drills, like I have a model where if I'm in an environment that has never done any physical development, here's what I do in 12 minutes. In 12 minutes, I start with about 3 to 4 minutes of ball movement, right? They're passing, they're dribbling, right? We're having fun with the ball. We're playing games with the ball, okay? Then we go through some sort of mobility, stability type work. So maybe with the ball, we're talking about young kids. They drop down into the bear position that we talked about and have slow taps on the ball, right? And I have videos if you want to see some videos of that. And then we go into a simple passing drill. And this can be in any sport, right? Pass, 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 pass for another 3-4 minutes. And then I let them run, jump, and then that's basically a 12-minute block. And so we run warm-ups that look like that. And so there's going to be times where you're going to have to keep the ball engaged because there are a lot of countries, Brazil, one of them, Holland, another one, right? That they're going to want the ball always involved. And that's okay. That's absolutely okay. We're just going to have times where the ball is not in play and that's it. So it's just number one, are your athletes having fun? And I find, and you know, we worked with these particular athletes here at the Academy for, I think, not even 6 months. And in 6 months, all of the coaching staff saw the difference between their movement when compared to other players outside the Academy. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of time to get that buy-in, but that's going to happen in every part of the world. That's why I do once a month coach education, so they trust me, so they know exactly what I'm doing and more importantly, why I'm doing it. And if you don't have any coach education scheduled, if they don't give you that sort of time, then it's, you know, in my opinion, not a very collaborative situation. So I would request to start having 30-minute education where you're leading it and sharing your thoughts and then figuring out, not only sharing your thoughts, sorry, I'm talking a little fast now because I'm getting excited, not only sharing your thoughts, but more importantly, figuring out how to blend your thoughts. So if today is a passing day, right? Okay, what are the focus points that you want to have in your passing session? Oh, A, B, C. Okay, we'll do A, B, C as well when we're warming up for 10 minutes. Like sometimes it's as easy as that, but you have to share while you're doing what you're doing. But common problem all over the world.
Perfeito. Mauro Saldanha. Bom dia, Nicole. Começar domingo com essa qualidade não tem preço. Muito grato por todo o conhecimento explorado. No Brasil, o feminino ainda é muito distante do masculino, principalmente em categorias de base. Teoricamente, nem existe por aqui. Atletas femininas iniciam a modalidade com uma idade já avançada, 14, 15 anos. E até mesmo já trabalhei com atletas de 18 que nunca tinham entrado num contexto de treinamento. Então, dentro de uma realidade do feminino, posso utilizar essa fase pré e de desenvolvimento que você exemplificou do masculino?
Yes, absolutely yes. The biggest difference with training a female football player versus a male football player, it's training age. As you just said, the female athletes, sometimes they start with the physical development at 14 years old. That's not the case with boys, right? They usually start a little bit younger. So the biggest problem that you're going to have to address when you're working with female athletes in any part of the world, in any sport, is that they simply just get started way too late. And I'm really passionate about that because, believe it or not, it's going to sound crazy, but I started training at like 6 years old. And it's not because I wanted to train, it's because I wanted to hang out with my dad, and that's what my dad was doing with my cousins. So training age is really important when it comes to female athletes, especially because they develop 2 years earlier than boys. So basically, you're getting your female athletes after or during their growth and maturation stage, and you're getting boys before that. So training age is going to be the limiting factor when it comes to female athletes. And it's just, and honestly, when they're young, there's not a lot of differences when it comes to training boys and girls. You're still teaching them the basic movement patterns and the main principles. So I would find ways in your youth academy for female athletes to figure out ways to get them exposure much earlier in their career.
Perfeito. Alexandre Ferreira. Bom dia, Nicole. Obrigado por compartilhar suas experiências. Você poderia disponibilizar os vídeos da apresentação dos exercícios?
I have a YouTube link that I can share. It's not a public link, it's a private link. But I have that YouTube link that I can share, yes. And that right now would be probably a good time to write down my email, and I'll write it in the chat box. But it's Nicole@coachnicolerodriguez.com.
Perfeito. Pergunta de Diego. Você é incrível, parabéns. Gostaria de saber mais sobre a avaliação dos alunos. Caso uma criança apresente alguns padrões como valgos dinâmicos, pés pronados, ele receberia o cartão vermelho e assim exercícios específicos para correção? E a partir de que idade se observam e tentam corrigir esses padrões?
When you're working with young athletes, so I would say athletes under the age of 12, okay? You might want to, when you see those patterns occur, so let's say valgus at the knee, okay? And I know the FMS, when you're doing the screen, says don't correct the pattern, okay? But I actually think differently when you're working with young athletes. I say correct the pattern, see if they can do it properly, because there's no awareness with their movement yet. So that might happen. And so I would first, before we talk about any corrective exercises, I would coach them into the right pattern. Maybe put a band, in the example of valgus, maybe put something around their knee to see if they can get in that position. If they can't, okay, then that's different. But usually you find that they can do it, they just don't know how to do it. You have to teach them. So if that's the situation, then it's basically any, movement training program that can help support that. And I would argue that isometric work at this point would be really important for that athlete. And that can be, hey, teaching them how to walk low with mini bands. Like it can be anything that can be more of an isometric type pattern. You know, two players pushing each other in a low split position, whatever the case is. I would say that use isometric strength to help build the awareness. So that would be my first response to that. Regarding anything that we can do, absolutely, there are things that we can do. You know, there are a lot of situations in our academy where our athletes have actually pain with extension, like in the trunk stability push-up. So there are absolutely ways that we're looking at strengthening the shoulders, trunks, and the hip to get them more prepared. And that would happen within the red flag sessions that we have once a week for our athletes. So absolutely, we can start to figure out, you know, what the athlete needs. And I would say for young athletes, you know, having Brazilian jiu-jitsu principles, wrestling principles, giving them some time to be on the ground, on their knees, on their hand is underestimated when it comes to youth athletes. And if you think about why, right? Okay, we all know that, hey, animal patterns are good. Animal patterns are helpful. But when you think about it for a youth athlete, okay, one way to get a lot of activation and information sent to the brain is by using the hands, the wrist, and the feet and the ankle. So when you get your athletes in tall kneeling positions, in bear positions, learning how to wrestle, that is basically just sending more information to the brain, because essentially you're using vision, hands, and feet. Okay, so yes, there are ways to start educating even young athletes how to control their movements. But again, you're going to be doing it through ground-based work.
Perfeito, Nicole. Pergunta de Fábio Campos. Excelente palestra, parabéns. Gostaria de saber quais dicas você poderia nos dar para treinamentos com criança que tenham algum grau de déficit de atenção ou autismo, caso você já tenha tido contato com esse tipo de público.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, you are going to have young athletes who have those issues. There's one athlete in particular who I believe that he was autistic that we just had. And it was interesting because he didn't like contact opportunities. So for example, I have my athletes, two young athletes, okay? They run towards each other, they bump their chest, and then they land and go back, right? Because I'm teaching them how to have contact. He didn't like to have contact with anything. He didn't like to do any of the tug of war drills or anything like that. So you are going to have athletes that are either ADD or have autistic tendencies. The truth is, it's not going to look perfect with those athletes, and you're just going to have to give them time to follow along. Those are always the athletes that are not going to look perfect, who are actually going to be doing things completely wrong. But in my experience, there is a massive delay in their maturity. And there's really nothing that you can do about that, especially if you're working in an organized team setting and you have 16 or 20 kids. There's not much that you're going to be able to do. In my situation, I always use this one athlete as my partner, as my example, so I can make sure that he's doing it well. And they naturally, because of their movement quality, they go into the red flag group. So imagine I have a group of 16 players, and I identified 5 of those players as red flag players. Well, I actually technically have 2 assistant coaches. It's me, the head coach, and the assistant coach in my physical development programs. It's mandatory that they have to come. So basically, the two coaches know who the red flag players are. Usually this ADHD or autistic kid is in that program as well. And basically those assistant coaches, their primary job is to focus on the red flag players. So that's what we do. With time, this one athlete that I had got used to the movements that we were doing. He was more comfortable when I did the movements with him as opposed to another athlete, because I, was able to show him better and he was more comfortable. But you're going to get those athletes. They can perform, they can play. It's just a matter of letting them work through it and get comfortable. But yeah, I don't have much more to add on that.
Estava em mute, estava mutado porque eu estava batendo fotos das perguntas que infelizmente não temos como responder todas, nenhum evento presencial tem como responder todas. Mas assim como os outros palestrantes, eu bati foto de todas as perguntas aqui, depois eu e você a gente vai trocar alguns e-mails para tentar responder essas pessoas e todos poderem ter suas dúvidas sanadas. Infelizmente, eu tenho que respeitar o horário, não posso estender, porque eu preciso que eles façam pausa, levantem da cadeira. Mas o que eu tenho para dizer é o seguinte: você tem um potencial absurdo trabalhando com esse nicho do mercado, que é um nicho que cada vez mais vem apresentando uma necessidade e com poucos profissionais fazendo um trabalho tão sério e tão profundo. Você faz pesquisas com Craig Liberson, você apresentou vários outros nomes aqui da área que estão fazendo pesquisas sérias. Eu já conversei isso com você fora das telas. Eu acredito que você tem que fazer um trabalho, e você está no seu projeto de fazer um trabalho. Eu quero que você deixasse umas mensagens para as pessoas, porque você tem muito para contribuir. Eu acredito que você no futuro vá explorar mais essa área com curso específico, produto digital, enfim. Então, eu queria que você deixasse umas palavras para o nosso público e como eles podem te encontrar, porque você está sempre muito aberta para passar o seu conhecimento e é isso que é o mais importante. Agradeço demais a sua participação aqui. Nós iremos ainda para o Brasil, com certeza, juntos, presencialmente. E nesse momento eu queria que você desse sua última palavra para o nosso público. Por favor, Nicole.
Clarity comes from engagement, not thought. And I'll say that again. Clarity comes from engagement and not thought. And so for me, we have to engage in this process that we're trying to develop. So that would be my final words to everyone, is I encourage you to keep asking questions, keep engaging, and keep just doing. That would be my number one piece of advice. And people can find me, you can send me an email, or you can probably reach out to me on Instagram. That would be the most easiest way. I'm not on social media a tremendous amount, but I do try to answer every email that I get. So, and if you try to contact me on social media, it's hit or miss. But if you contact me via email, you'll for sure get a response.
Perfeito, Nicole. Muito obrigado. Seu YouTube channel é Nicole Rodriguez, Coach Nicole Rodriguez, certo? YouTube channel.
Yes, needs to be updated, but there's some good videos there too.
Perfeito, Nicole. Thank you. Oh, muito obrigado mesmo. Tenha um excelente domingo. Pessoal, vamos fazer...
Good luck. Tchau, tchau.
Thank you. Vamos fazer uma pausa de 15 minutos e voltamos em 15 minutos com o Dr. Stuart McGill.